Greetings and salutations, friends. Halfro here, and this is a little bit of a different video today. I realized while editing my other videos that my current laptop just wasn't cutting it. It's pretty old, and I've been wanting to upgrade for a while now so I can play some PC games, join the PC Master Race. And I figured it was the perfect time with quarantine, and I've had a little bit of extra funds on hand, and so I felt like it'd be good to kind of show you the cringeworthy process of me trying to put together a computer that I haven't actually tried to do in 20 years. Now I have the specs here that I'm going to tell you of everything that I bought. Links to all those that you can purchase are in the description down below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and let me know what you think of my build. So I have them out here so I remember exactly what I bought, because I don't have them memorized off the top of my head. But we have, for the monitors, I went with the Sceptre 24-inch curved 144 hertz gaming LED monitor. Now this was actually my second choice. My first choice I was available, but then I kind of waited too long to pull the trigger on it and I was unable to get it. But these are really good monitors from what I've witnessed so far. For the RAM, I went with the Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 3600. Usually you're going to go with either a 3600 or 3200, and I felt that the 3600 was going to kind of give me that little extra boost, especially since I'm going to be streaming on this PC as well. And I only wanted to do a one PC build, not go with two and try and do that. That was just going to be even more confusing. Now the case that I went with is the NZXT H510 Elite. It actually comes included with two AER RGB fans, so I didn't have to buy those separately, and the cost of the case actually was just about the same as it would be if I bought them separately, so it kind of worked out. For the mouse and the keyboard, I went with the Redragon S101 wired gaming keyboard and mouse combo. I don't really care about having a wireless keyboard or a mouse. With the setup that I have right here, everything's fairly close by. I'm not like trying to game from my bed or anything like that. For the motherboard, I went with the Gigabyte B450 Aorus M. For the CPU, I went with the AMD Ryzen 5 3600. This is a good mid-range that I felt would work out pretty well. I didn't want to go too pricey with the AMD Ryzen 7 or go too crazy with some newer CPUs. I felt like this was a good one so that I could upgrade eventually when I was ready to do so, but this would work out pretty well for me. For the memory, I went with a WD Black SN750 500 gig NVMe SSD, which is an M.2 slot, which hooks right into the motherboard. I kind of wish I'd have gone with a 1 terabyte and spent a little bit of that extra money, because I feel like I may use up all the space. I currently have Destiny 2 installed on this, and it took up almost 100 gigs of that 500. Power, I went with the Antec Neo Echo Gold Zen series. This is an 80 plus gold certified, and if upon all my reading I wanted to get at least an 80 plus silver rating, so this is going to be more than good for me, and it was not too pricey for what I was looking for. The GPU that I bought was the GeForce GTX 1660 Super. I apologize that you're not going to see me actually putting it together. It's going to be more of a before and after picture of what I did, because I was using my phone to record this and I was doing it handheld, so I wasn't on a tripod or anything, and so I apologize for that. Okay, now the first thing that we're going to do, obviously, is we're going to open up the case, because we can't really put a computer together without it. So I open it up, and I took both side panels off because we're going to need to get around to each side in order to put this together. The next thing that I went ahead and did was I took out the battery, and I also took out the CPU and the motherboard, and kind of put those together on the desk, which I had already built. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put together the battery. Now obviously it's already put together and it's got all of the connections and wires that you need for the computer in there, and what you're going to do is we actually just slide it right in underneath the case. For this case specifically, it'll tell you on the case that you buy whether you want the fan on the battery to point either down or up. In this case, it has a dust filter underneath, so we were going to put that battery with the fan face down, and then we are going to actually just screw it in. There's going to be 4 little screws that you're going to line up with the case, and then you're just going to screw those straight in, and that's going to take care of that. The next thing is to put the CPU into the motherboard. Now you want to be really careful when taking out the CPU because there's all these little tiny pins that you do not want to touch with your hands. So I just went straight on the sides, and then you're going to lift the little placement pin up, and then you're going to kind of just maneuver the CPU around until it falls straight in there, and then you're going to put that pin down and it's going to lock into place and you'll be set. The next thing you're going to do is the fan. Now, I made a mistake when doing this. I didn't realize that the glue was actually already there. I thought that it was like a little piece of tape that you peeled off to then get to the glue and then set it down on the battery, but that was not the case, so I accidentally scratched a little bit of it, and so don't do that. Don't do my mistake. If you're using a case that has a little tempered glass like I did so you can actually see into it, make sure that you are putting the fan on correctly so that you can kind of see the logo that you put on in there. For this motherboard, I actually had to take the screws off that were already there, and then the screws for the AMD one didn't need any of those extra screws that were included with the motherboard, so I just set those aside and screwed those in to place. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to connect the fan, the little cord that the fan comes with, into the 4-pin connector that is usually right next to the CPU. Now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to install the RAM. Now, if you look at your motherboard instructions, it'll usually tell you what slots to use for the RAM that you have bought. For mine, it was kind of a little interesting because it said 1, 3, 2, and then 4 was the order that they were in. Sometimes it'll just have like 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll tell you to use 2 and 4, which are the ones that are away from the CPU most. But for mine kind of started outward and went in towards the CPU, and it was 1 and 2 that I used, which was actually, if you're counting it from 1, 2, 3, 4 going towards it, it's 1 and 3. So it was a little interesting. Just check your motherboard and see where it needs to go and you'll be set. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the memory, the 500 gig SSD, which is the M.2. And what I actually already did was the little M.2 slot, there was a protector over top of it. So I unscrewed that and took that off, and then basically you're going to nudge the memory into the M.2 slot until it kind of gets in there. You'll kind of feel it when it's done. And then what you're going to do is, depending on how high, I didn't realize this at the time, but I actually needed a separate little pin to screw in to then screw in the memory so that it sat flat. You don't want to try and push it down so it's kind of like sideways depending on how high that M.2 slot is. I did not realize that initially, so I was trying to screw it in and I was like, why is this not working? And then I realized I needed that extra little topper to then screw it in. The next thing is, this motherboard actually came with a little protector for the memory, and it had some glue on it that you then kind of like put in, and then you put it down, and then you screw in the side of it, depending on the type of connector you have. Depending on what motherboard you go with, you may not have this, but it was a nice little added bonus that I saw, and it's something that you don't need to do if you feel like it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to put the motherboard onto the case. So we're going to take the case, we're going to lay it down flat. I did not film myself doing this. It was a little too complex, and interestingly enough, it had a whole bunch of screws that I needed to screw in, but for some reason, based on the motherboard that I had and the case, it required less screws than I thought. It came with like 24 different screws, and I only used about 6 of them. But it sits in there just fine. It's not moving. It kind of sits in there really well, and nothing is coming out. It's not moving or anything with everything on there. So you may or may not have to use all the screws that are included when you do that. So we're going to install the GPU next, and basically we're going to unscrew, there's a little side panel on the back, and then the 2 top little panels to where it'll fit in the access ports for that GPU. And basically you're just going to line it up and see how many ports you need to take apart and which ones, because depending on the motherboard that you get, it may not be like the top one, it may be like the one just below it and the one below that. So just take a look, put it in there, and just kind of gauge which ones you need to take out, and then take those out. and then we will install the GPU. So for the GPU, it's really easy. All you're gonna do is line it up with the PCI slot that's there, and then shove it in. I definitely kind of had my hand around the back at where the motherboard is on the other side to kind of help with it going in there. And then I put the back panels back on, screwed those back in, and everything was good to go. Now for the last part, all of the wiring and connecting the power to everything. First thing I did was I grabbed the 24 pin connector, and it only goes in one way, so just make sure that you're kind of shoving it in there right. It took me a few tries to really get it all in there. I had to kind of put the 2 pins together to really get it in there and seated properly. Then I went ahead and grabbed there will be 2 4 pins that I connected to. There's a little section at the top of the case where you can kind of slide those 2 connectors in that go right into the other side of the motherboard as well, and those connected in there. After that, it was the PCI power for the GPU, and that just came in similar to the way I did the motherboard connector and kind of just shoved that right in. And that brings us to the part that I didn't actually film. So the rest of the connections that I actually did was, of course, on the very bottom underneath the GPU is all of the extra slotting. So the USB 3.0, the front panel connector, all of those things I kind of had to gauge based off of some videos I watched and the instructions that came with the motherboard and the case. Because the case actually included its own front panel connector, I didn't have to have little separate panels that they kind of include those with the motherboard. So I actually just had to find where exactly that went in on the motherboard. It actually is, it kind of says it right there where it says the front panel connector should go, but based on what power is needed, it'll go on a specific spot in that front panel. It's actually a large little thing, and I actually was putting it in wrong because the first time I turned the computer on, nothing happened. So I had to go back in there and be like, why is this not working? And then I found out that I was plugging it in wrong, and then the computer worked. And what was left to do was to plug in my mouse and my keyboard and then start working with getting Windows installed. I am not going to go over how to get your computer set up to work. I will leave a perfect video by Jay's 2 Cents that I watched that kind of helped me go over all of that, as it was my first time in a long time. And yeah, so this is my build, and I'm really proud of it. I thought it turned out really well, and I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed the setup, if you found it informational and you like the build, please leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. And as always, like and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you so much.